Hey everyone and welcome back. Let's talk about the American dream for a second. You work hard, you save up, you finally buy a place to call your own. Your little slice of heaven, your castle. But then you discover that your castle is located in a kingdom ruled by a shadowy council of rulers you didn't elect, a group with the power to dictate the color of your front door, the height of your grass, and whether or not your garden gnome is in regulation. I'm talking, of course, about the Homeowners Association. The HOA, three little letters that can turn a dream home into a battlefield of passive aggression and bureaucratic nonsense. They exist alongside another potential menace, the nightmare neighbor, that one person on the block who seems to live for making everyone else's life just a little bit harder. But for every tyrannical board and every nosy neighbor, there's a homeowner who's reached their tipping point. A hero with a copy of the bylaws, a highlighter, and a truly devious imagination. Today, we're celebrating those heroes. We're diving into the glorious archives of neighborhood warfare to tell the tales of people who fought back, not by breaking the rules, but by following them to the letter. Our first story is a classic, a true masterpiece of malicious compliance. It's a cautionary tale for any HOA that thinks it can bully a resident into submission. It's about a simple request that snowballed into an avalanche of petty emails, and how one homeowner discovered that the most powerful weapon in their arsenal was the HOA's own rulebook and a few gallons of bubblegum pink paint. It all started, as these things often do, with a letter. A crisp, white envelope tucked into my mailbox, bearing the official letterhead of the Northwood Pines Homeowners Association. My heart didn't sink immediately. I figured it was the quarterly newsletter or a reminder about the upcoming community yard sale. My wife and I had lived in the neighborhood for about 3 years, and our interactions with the HOA had been minimal and, dare I say, pleasant. We kept our lawn mowed, our hedges trimmed, and our house, a perfectly respectable shade of beige, was in good repair. We were by all accounts model residents. I opened the letter while walking up the driveway, my eyes scanning the text. "Dear homeowner," it began, "a recent community inspection has revealed that the exterior paint of your property at 124 Willow Creek Lane is showing signs of fading and wear. Per Section 7, Article 4 of the Community Bylaws, all homes must be maintained in a like-new condition to preserve neighborhood aesthetics and property values. Please submit a plan for repainting your residence within 30 days. I stopped in my tracks and looked at my house. My perfectly fine, perfectly beige house. Was the paint a little faded? Maybe if you stood 2 inches from the siding and squinted under a forensic-grade UV lamp. To any normal human being, it looked like a house. A clean, well-kept beige house. I sighed, tossed the letter on the kitchen counter, and figured it was a simple fix. I'd email them, explain that the paint was in fine condition, and that would be the end of it. Oh, what a sweet, naive fool I was. My polite email was met with a curt, formal response. The decision was final. The house needed to be repainted. No appeals. My wife and I were annoyed, to say the least. It was an unexpected expense of several $1,000s that we hadn't budgeted for, but we were rule followers. We loved our home and didn't want to start a war with the board, so we acquiesced. Fine, we'll repaint the stupid house. This is where Phase 2 of the HOA's reign of terror began. To repaint your house, you first have to submit a color choice for approval. The bylaws included a pre-approved color palette, a list of about 20 different shades of beige. There was sandy beige, desert tan, khaki, stone, taupe, and my personal favorite, grayish, which I can only assume was created when someone got depressed while looking at a color swatch. We picked a color called linen, which was virtually indistinguishable from our current beige, filled out the appropriate forms in triplicate, and sent them off for approval. A week later, we got an email. Denied. No explanation. Just a single, cold word. I called the HOA president, a woman named Carol who seemed to have a retired gym teacher level of enthusiasm for enforcing rules. "Carol," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "we submitted our paint choice, linen, and it was denied. It's on the pre-approved list. Can you tell me why?" The board felt it was too similar to your current color, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. We want to see a noticeable improvement. A noticeable improvement. Carol, it's the same color palette you mandated. How much improvement can you make from one shade of beige to another? The board has made its decision, she clipped back. This went on for 2 months. We submitted desert tan, denied. Too yellow, we submitted stone, denied. Too gray, we submitted khaki, denied. The board feels it's too dark and could be imposing. Every submission was met with a new, more ridiculous rejection. It became clear they weren't just enforcing a rule, they were enjoying this. They were on a power trip, flexing their tiny bit of authority over us. The final straw came when they fined us for not submitting a viable plan within the original 30-day window, despite them being the ones rejecting every single proposal. That night I was fuming. I was pacing around the living room, ranting to my wife, who was trying her best to calm me down. "This is insane," I yelled. "They have us in a box. They tell us we have to paint, give us a list of colors they approve, and then reject every color on the list. What do they want from us?" My wife, bless her heart, had been quietly scrolling through the digital copy of the HOA bylaws on her tablet. It was a monstrous, 200-page document filled with legalese and absurdly specific rules about everything from satellite dish placement to the permissible species of mailbox-adjacent shrubbery. "Well," she said softly, a slow smile spreading across her face, "they want us to pick a color from the approved palette, right?" "Yeah, and we have. Maybe we just haven't looked at the entire palette," she said, turning the tablet toward me. I looked at the screen. She had scrolled to an appendix at the very back of the document, a section titled Historical Color Palette Addendum 1988. It was a list of colors that had been approved when the neighborhood was first built in the late 80s, a time of big hair, neon leggings, and questionable design choices. And these colors had, for some reason, never been removed from the official bylaws. They were still, technically, pre-approved. My eyes scanned the list past the harvest gold and avocado green, and then I saw it. Tucked away between seafoam and mauve were two words that made my heart sing: bubblegum pink. I looked at my wife. She looked at me. The same thought sparked between us, a beautiful, terrible, glorious idea. "No," I whispered, the anger draining away, replaced by pure, unadulterated glee. "Oh yes," she said, her smile widening. "It's on the list." The next morning, I emailed the HOA. The subject line was official paint color selection for 124 Willow Creek Lane. The body of the email was short and sweet. "To whom it may concern, per the approved historical color palette addendum, we have selected our new exterior paint color, bubblegum pink, color code 84C. As this is a pre-approved color, we require no further consent from the board and will be commencing work immediately. Have a wonderful day." I attached a screenshot of the relevant page from the bylaws, with the words bubblegum pink circled in bright red. Then I hit send. The silence was deafening. For 2 full days we heard nothing. I can only imagine the frantic, panicked meetings that must have taken place. The desperate search through their own rules, hoping to find a loophole that would stop us. But there wasn't one. We had them. They had spent months tormenting us with their rule book, and now that same rule book was our shield and our sword. On the 3rd day, the painters arrived. I had called them the same day we sent the email and paid extra for a rush job. When the crew chief saw the color swatch, he let out a low whistle. "You sure about this, boss?" he asked, holding up a card of the most vibrant, obnoxious Pepto-Bismol on steroids pink I had ever seen. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I said with a grin. The transformation took 2 days. The first coat went on and our beige house disappeared under a layer of pastel absurdity. By the second coat, it was magnificent. Our house glowed. It was a beacon of pure malicious spite. You could probably see it from space. Cars started slowing down as they drove by. People were pointing. A few neighbors came out, their faces a mixture of horror and awe. One of them, our friendly next-door neighbor Tom, came over laughing. "You absolute legend," he said, shaking his head. "Carol is going to have an aneurysm." And sure enough, on the afternoon of the second day, Carol's car came screeching to a halt in front of our house. She got out, her face pale, her mouth hanging open. She just stood there on the sidewalk, staring, as the painters put the finishing touches on the trim. I was waiting for this moment. I strolled out onto my freshly painted pink porch, holding a tall glass of iced tea. "Afternoon, Carol," I said cheerfully. "Like the new color, it's from the approved palette." She just sputtered. She couldn't form a sentence. She pointed a trembling finger at the house, then at me, then back at the house. She knew, and I knew she knew, that she was completely and utterly powerless. We had followed her rules. We had complied with her every demand. We had painted our house a pre-approved color. She couldn't do a single thing about it. She finally just got back in her car and sped off. Our house became a local legend. It was known as the Pink House, a monument to the day a homeowner finally snapped. The HOA was forced to hold an emergency meeting to amend the bylaws and remove the historical color palette, but it was too late for them. The rule said a house only needed to be repainted every 10 to 15 years. We had another decade, at least, of glorious bubblegum pink defiance. And you know what? The color eventually grew on us. It was a daily reminder that sometimes the best way to fight a ridiculous system isn't to break the rules, but to follow them so perfectly that you break the system itself. Okay, can we just take a moment to appreciate the sheer beauty of this? This isn't just revenge, it's art. This is what happens when you push a reasonable person too far. The HOA board thought they were playing chess, moving their little pawns around, feeling powerful. They had no idea they were playing against a grandmaster who was about to flip the whole board over. The key here, and what makes malicious compliance so satisfying, is that the homeowner did absolutely nothing wrong. They played entirely within the established system. The weapon used against them, the bloated, overly specific rulebook, became their greatest asset. It's a perfect example of turning an enemy's strength into their weakness. I can just picture the panicked faces of the board members as they frantically search their own documents for a way out, only to realize they de-built their own trap. It's a beautiful, and in this case, a beautifully pink, reminder to anyone in a position of petty authority. Be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. Some neighborhood disputes are about the objective rules, the height of a hedge, the placement of a trash can. But every now and then, a conflict arises that isn't about the rules at all. It's about who you are. Our next story is about a homeowner who was targeted not for what they did, but for who they loved. It started with a complaint about a tiny flag, a pathetic attempt to bully and intimidate. But the complainer made a critical mistake. They underestimated their neighbor's creativity, their resolve, and their willingness to make a very, very big statement. My partner David and I bought our first house about 5 years ago. It was a modest little place in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a decent-sized yard for our dog to run around in. We spent the first year making it our own, planting a garden, painting the rooms, and finally feeling like we had a real home. To celebrate, we did something small, something that was just for us. We put a small rainbow pride flag, the kind you stick in a garden pot, in the flower bed next to our front porch. It was maybe a foot tall. It was subtle, but it was a little symbol of our identity, a quiet declaration that this was our space. For months, it was a non-issue. We met the neighbors, we were friendly, we participated in the block party. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then, Karen moved in next door. I know, it's a stereotype, but if the shoe fits, you have to call her Karen. She was a woman in her late 50s with a haircut you could set your watch to and a permanent expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. Her first interaction with us was to complain that our recycling bin was 2 inches too close to her property line. We moved it. Her second was to inform us that our dog, who was quietly sunbathing in our own backyard, was staring at her provocatively. We apologized. It was clear she was one of those neighbors, the kind who patrols the neighborhood with a measuring tape and a copy of the HOA bylaws. Then, about a month after she moved in, her focus landed on our little flag. She caught me while I was getting the mail one afternoon. "Excuse me," she said, marching across her perfectly manicured lawn. "I need to talk to you about that." She gestured disdainfully toward the flag. "Good afternoon to you too, Karen," I said, trying to keep it light. "What about it?" "It's not appropriate for the neighborhood," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, as if she was saving me from a huge social faux pas. "It's a political statement, and it brings down the aesthetic." I was floored. "It's a pride flag, Karen. It's not political, it's personal, and it's in my own flower bed." "The HOA has rules about signage," she snapped, her friendly pretense gone. "And I will be reporting it." She spun on her heel and marched back to her house. I was fuming. It was such a small thing, but her complaint felt so large, so full of hate. It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about us. She didn't like that we two men were living next door and the flag was a convenient target. True to her word, a week later we got an email from the HOA. "A complaint has been filed regarding unapproved signage on your property." My blood began to boil, but I knew I couldn't fight this with anger. I had to fight it with facts. I spent that evening reading our HOA covenant cover to cover, and I found what I was looking for. The rule about signage pertained only to signs larger than 2 by 3 feet. Our tiny garden flag wasn't even close. I drafted a polite but firm email back to the HOA, citing the specific bylaw and pointing out that our flag was well within the rules. I CC'd Karen. I received a short reply from the board. "Thank you for the clarification. The matter is closed." I felt a surge of victory. Take that, Karen. But I had underestimated her pettiness. The flag stayed, but her campaign of harassment escalated. She'd call the city if our grass was a quarter-inch too long. She'd complain if we had friends over for a barbecue, claiming our laughter was disruptive. She was trying to make our lives miserable, to make us feel unwelcome in our own home. The joy we felt in our house started to curdle into anxiety. Every time I stepped outside, I'd check to see if she was watching from her window. One night David and I were talking about it, and he was just so defeated. "Maybe we should just take the flag down," he said quietly. "It's not worth all this." And that's when something inside me snapped. I wasn't angry anymore. I was inspired. "No," I said. "We're not taking it down. We're not hiding. In fact, I think we need to be louder." I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop again. I wasn't looking for a defense this time. I was looking for an opportunity. I scrolled past signage, past lawn maintenance, past all of Karen's petty little weapons. And then I found the section on fences. It was incredibly detailed. Fences had to be exactly 6 feet high. They had to be made of cedar wood. The pickets had to be a specific width. It went on and on about every conceivable physical dimension. But I noticed something crucial. In all its pages of mind-numbing detail, the covenant said absolutely nothing about what color a fence could be painted. Not a single word. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. I looked at David. "Honey," I said, "I have a terrible, wonderful idea." The next Saturday was a beautiful spring day. We went to the hardware store, not for 1 can of paint, or 2. We bought dozens. We bought the most vibrant, unapologetically bright red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet paint we could find. The guy at the paint counter looked at our cart, piled high with a rainbow of colors, and just said, "Wow, you guys must be planning one heck of a party." "Something like that," I replied with a smile. Our fence ran the entire length of the property line between our house and Karen's. It was a 6-foot-tall, 100-foot-long privacy fence. It was our canvas. We started that morning. We laid out the tarps and popped the first can of red paint. We decided on a simple pattern: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. Repeat. Each picket got its own color. The first red picket went up, a bold slash of defiance. Then orange. Then yellow. As the first full rainbow sequence took shape, we both just stood back and started laughing. It was already glorious. It took us the entire weekend. It was hard work. Our backs ached, our hands were stained with a dozen different colors, but with every picket we painted, the anxiety and fear we'd been feeling was replaced by a giddy, intoxicating joy. We were turning something ugly, her hatred, into something beautiful. Other neighbors started to notice. Mr. Henderson from across the street came over with a six-pack of beer. "I saw what you two were doing," he said with a wink. "'Bout time someone stood up to that old bat. Looks fantastic." A family down the street with two kids came by and the kids just pointed in awe. "Mommy, a rainbow." We never saw Corinne all weekend, but we knew she was watching. We could feel her eyes burning into our backs from behind her pristine curtains. We finished the last violet picket late Sunday evening as the sun was setting. We cleaned up our brushes, packed away the empty cans, and stood back to admire our work. It was breathtaking. A 100-foot-long, 6-foot-tall, vibrant, magnificent rainbow. It wasn't just a fence anymore. It was a statement. It was a monument to pride, a giant, colorful middle finger to bigotry. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, Corinne was out in her yard, pretending to inspect her rose bushes but really just staring at the fence, her face a thunderous mask of pure, impotent rage. She looked like a cartoon villain who had just seen their evil plan blow up in their face. "Morning, Corinne," I chirped, giving her my biggest, friendliest wave. "What do you think of the new paint job? I checked the bylaws. It's totally up to code." She didn't say a word. She just glared, her face turning a shade of red that would have fit right in on our new fence. She turned and stormed back into her house, slamming the door behind her. She tried, of course. She called the HOA and filed a complaint, but there was nothing they could do. We hadn't broken a single rule. The fence was the right height, the right material, the right construction. There was no rule about color. The matter, they informed her, was closed. The rainbow fence became our shield. The harassment stopped. Corinne, it seemed, couldn't stand to even look in our direction anymore. She had wanted to erase our little symbol of pride. Instead, she forced us to create one so big, so bold, and so permanent that she had to see it every single time she looked out her window. It was, and still is, the most beautiful thing we've ever built. This is just chef's kiss. Perfection. This one hits differently because it's not just about a silly rule. It's a direct and powerful clapback against homophobia. The neighbor wasn't just being a stickler for the rules. She was using the rules as a weapon to enforce her own prejudice. And what I love so much is how the homeowners responded. They didn't just win the argument, they completely redefined the terms of the fight. They took the very thing she was attacking, their pride, and magnified it by 1,000. It's such a powerful message. When someone tries to make you feel small or invisible, the best response is to become bigger and brighter than they could ever imagine. The fence went from being a simple property divider to a massive, beautiful symbol of love, defiance, and community. And the best part, the homophobic neighbor had to pay for her hate with a front row seat to a pride parade every single day. That's not just petty revenge, that's poetic justice. All right, let's move from the grand, colorful statements to the brilliantly absurd. HOAs have a strange obsession with trash cans. You'd think these plastic bins on wheels were the single greatest threat to property values in modern history. They want them hidden out of sight, as if the entire neighborhood needs to maintain the illusion that nobody who lives there actually produces garbage. Our next hero received one of these classic hide your can notices, but the HOA made a critical error. They were very specific about what needed to be done, but they weren't remotely specific about how it needed to be done. And in that tiny little loophole, a masterpiece of petty construction was born. My life is pretty simple. I work a standard 9 to 5, I come home, I try to keep my house from falling apart, and on Tuesday nights, I roll my trash and recycling bins to the curb. On Wednesday morning, I roll them back. For years, I'd been rolling them back to a neat little gravel patch on the side of my house. It was tucked away, convenient, and frankly, the only logical place for them to go. You could only see them from the street if you were driving by and specifically craned your neck at the exact right moment. It was a non-issue, a solved problem. Or so I thought. One Thursday afternoon, I found a letter from my HOA stuck to my front door. It was a courtesy notice, which is HOA speak for "we're watching you, and we don't like what we see." The notice informed me that I was in violation of Bylaw 1138, subsection C. All refuse containers must be stored in a location that is not visible from the street. It included a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my trash can, taken from across the road, looking like some kind of trash-based Bigfoot sighting. I was given 14 days to remedy the situation or face a $50 fine, with subsequent fines for every week of noncompliance. I sighed the deep, weary sigh of a man who just wanted to be left alone. This was a new thing. For 5 years, my trash can had lived peacefully on that gravel patch without a peep from anyone. But our HOA had recently held elections, and the new board president was a retired accountant named Gerald who had way too much time on his hands and a passion for laminated notices. My first thought was, where else could it possibly go? The garage. It's a one-car garage already packed with, a car and lawn equipment. Plus, in the summer heat, a garage full of garbage is just a recipe for disaster. The backyard. To get it there, I'd have to unlatch a gate, drag the heavy bin over a bumpy lawn, and then do the reverse every trash day. It was a logistical nightmare. The side of the house was the only place that made sense. I decided to try reason. I sent a polite email to the HOA board. I explained my situation, noted that the cans were only barely visible, and asked if there could be an exception, as there was no other practical storage location. The response I got back from Gerald was swift and utterly devoid of human compassion. "Dear Mr. Johnson," it read, "the rule is the rule. It is in place to maintain the uniform aesthetic of our community. There will be no exceptions. The can must not be visible from the street. You have 12 days remaining to comply." The curtness, the absolute refusal to even consider my point, just flipped a switch in my brain. The frustration turned into a quiet, simmering rage. "Fine, Gerald, you want to play by the book. Let's read the book." I pulled up the digital copy of the bylaws and found the rule. All refuse containers must be stored in a location that is not visible from the street. I read it again, and then I started to smile. It was so beautifully, so stupidly vague. It didn't say the containers had to be in a garage. It didn't say they had to be in the backyard. It didn't specify how they had to be hidden. The only condition was that they could not be visible from the street. My mind started racing. I could plant a hedge, but that would take years to grow. I could put up a little vinyl screen, but that felt too compliant. No, the response had to match the absurdity of the rule itself. The rule was inflexible, literal, and completely lacking in common sense. My solution should be, too. I wasn't going to move the trash can. I was going to make the trash can disappear, magically, with lumber. That Saturday, I went to the home improvement store with a plan. I walked past the pre-made fence panels and went straight for the raw materials. I bought 4 long pressure-treated posts, a bag of concrete mix, and a stack of cedar fence pickets, enough for a very small but very tall fence. The cashier gave me a funny look, probably wondering what kind of tiny, high-security enclosure I was building. If only he knew. I got home and got to work. I didn't move the trash can. I left it right there in its spot of defiance. I started digging the post holes around it, forming a perfect 3x3-foot square. My neighbors watched with curiosity. My next-door neighbor, Dave, wandered over. "Hey man, what's the project?" he asked. "HOA told me I have to hide my trash can," I said, leaning on my shovel. "Oh yeah, I got that notice too. Real pain. I'm just gonna start keeping mine in the garage, I guess." "Yeah," I said with a grin. I had a different idea. I mixed the concrete and set the 4 posts. They stuck out of the ground like weird wooden totems. I let them set overnight. The next day was Sunday, the main event. I started attaching the fence pickets. I started at the bottom and worked my way up. At 4 feet, it looked like a nice little trash can corral. Dave gave me a thumbs up from his window, but I didn't stop. I kept going. 5 feet. Now it was a proper enclosure, 6 feet. It was now the height of a standard privacy fence, completely obscuring the bin. I could have stopped there. It would have been compliant. But this wasn't just about compliance anymore. This was about making a point. I added another foot of pickets, taking the total height to a towering 7 feet. When I was done, it was the most ridiculous thing I had ever built. It was a bizarre wooden monolith on the side of my house, a tiny fortress-like structure that contained nothing but a single, humble trash can. It was 10 times more of an eyesore than the can had ever been. It screamed, "Look at me," in a way my simple black plastic bin never could. But in this was the beautiful part, it followed the rule. To the letter. The trash can was, without a shadow of a doubt, not visible from the street. I waited. On Tuesday, I got an email from Gerald. Subject, unapproved structure. My heart leaped. "It has come to our attention," the email read, "that you have erected a structure on your property without architectural review. Please be advised that this is a violation of." I cut him off with my reply. I attached a photo of the section of the bylaws regarding fences. It stated that any fence not attached to the primary residence and under 8 feet in height did not require board approval. My trash can fortress was freestanding and a mere 7 feet tall. "Dear Gerald," I wrote, "thank you for your concern. As you can see from the attached bylaw, my structure is fully compliant with all community regulations. It also serves to remedy the previous violation regarding my refuse container, which is no longer visible from the street. I now consider that matter closed. Have a great day." The silence that followed was sweeter than any victory I have ever known. I can only imagine the apoplectic rage in the HOA boardroom. They knew they had been beaten. An inspector came by, took a few pictures of the trash tower, sighed, and drove away. There was nothing they could do. I had followed their stupid rule, and I had used their other stupid rules to protect my stupid solution. My trash can fence became a thing of legend in the neighborhood. People would drive by and point, laughing. It was a constant, ugly, 7-foot-tall reminder of the HOA's own pettiness. It stood there for 3 glorious months. Finally, I got a notice about a proposed amendment to the bylaws. The new rule was much more specific. All refuse containers must be stored within a garage or in a backyard, behind the rear line of the house. The amendment passed. The day after it went into effect, I spent a very satisfying morning dismantling my fortress. My point had been made. The HOA had been forced to change their own rules because of their inability to apply a little common sense. And I'd like to think that somewhere, Gerald still has nightmares about my 7-foot-tall trash can fence. I absolutely love this one because of its sheer, deadpan absurdity. This is malicious compliance at its most literal and comedic. The homeowner didn't just follow the rule. He held up a giant magnifying glass to it, exposing its flaws for the entire neighborhood to see. The HOA's goal was to improve aesthetics, to make things look nicer. The outcome of their vague, poorly written rule was the exact opposite, a bizarre, ugly wooden tower that drew way more attention than the original problem. It's a perfect case study in the dangers of mindless bureaucracy. When you create rules without considering the human element or the potential for creative interpretation, you're just begging for someone to come along and make you look like a fool. This guy didn't just hide his trash can. He built a monument to the HOA's own incompetence, and he used their own rulebook as the blueprint. It's a quiet, structural masterpiece of spite. Most of the time, these HOA battles are born from pure spite and annoyance. A war between adults over adult things like paint colors and trash cans. But our next story is different. It's about what happens when an HOA's obsession with sterile uniformity collides with one of the most powerful forces in the universe, a parent's desire to make their children happy. It starts with a simple, wholesome request for a backyard playset. It ends with a full-blown agricultural rebellion that turned a manicured suburban lawn into a scene from the heartland. My wife and I moved into our neighborhood for one primary reason: the schools. It was billed as a family-friendly community, and on the surface it was. There were kids riding bikes in the streets, a community pool, and nice big backyards. We had two kids, a 7-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter, and all they wanted in the world was a swing set. Not just any swing set. They had a picture from a catalog pinned to the fridge for months. It was a nice wooden one, with 2 swings, a little rock wall, and a slide. A fort of their very own. Saved up, and for my son's birthday we finally bought it. It was a big purchase for us, a real investment in our kids' happiness. Before scheduling the delivery, I did my due diligence. I knew our HOA had an architectural review committee, or ARC, that had to approve any exterior structures. So I downloaded the forms, filled them out meticulously, attached the product photos, the dimensions, and a little hand-drawn map of where we planned to put it in our spacious, fenced-in backyard. I sent it off, expecting a rubber stamp approval in a week or two. This was a family neighborhood, after all. What could be more family-friendly than a playset? 3 weeks went by, then a month. I sent a follow-up email. Finally, a thin envelope arrived from the HOA. I opened it, expecting an approval letter. Instead, I saw the big, red, stamped word, DENIAD. I just stared at it. Denied? Why? I read the attached letter. The reasoning was as vague as it was infuriating. The committee finds that the proposed structure is not in keeping with the natural landscape and aesthetic harmony of the community. It also mentioned concerns about potential long-term disrepair, creating an eyesore. I was dumbfounded. An eyesore. It was a beautiful cedar playset that would be hidden in our own private backyard. I immediately called the head of the ARC, a woman named Mrs. Gable. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm calling about our playset application that was denied. I was hoping you could help me understand the specific reasons." "The reasons were stated in the letter," she said coolly. "We don't feel a large, man-made structure of that type is appropriate." "With all due respect," I countered, "this is a neighborhood full of kids. I can see 2 other playsets from my back window right now." "Those were approved under previous boards," she sniffed. "This board is taking a more proactive approach to preserving the community's intended aesthetic." I tried to reason with her, to plead my case, but it was like talking to a brick wall. The decision was final. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with anger. But the anger was nothing compared to the heartbreak I felt when I had to tell my kids. They had been asking about the surprise fort every single day. Seeing their little faces crumple into tears, that was it for me. The line had been crossed. This wasn't about aesthetics anymore. This was about a soulless committee of busybodies telling my kids they weren't allowed to have fun in their own backyard. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a pot of coffee, and I did what all our heroes do. I read the covenant, every single one of its 150 soul-crushing pages. I read about fence heights and shed sizes. I read about lawn maintenance schedules and the approved species of decorative trees. And in the deepest, dustiest corner of the document, in a section on landscaping, I found it. The bylaws were incredibly strict about non-living structures, but there was a fascinating little clause, probably written decades ago and forgotten, meant to encourage a bit of gardening. It read, "Homeowners are permitted to utilize their property for the cultivation of plants, including vegetables, fruits, and grains, provided they are for personal or family consumption." I read it 10 times. Permitted to utilize their property. It didn't say which part of the property. It didn't say the backyard. It didn't mention a size limit. It just said you could grow food. An idea started to form in my mind. A green, leafy, 8-foot-tall idea. An idea that would be far more of an aesthetic disruption than a cedar playset in the backyard ever could be. I looked out the front window at my pristine, green, perfectly manicured HOA-compliant lawn, and I smiled. The next morning I explained my plan to my wife. She thought I was crazy at first. "You're going to do what to the front lawn?" But then she remembered the look on the kids' faces, and her skepticism turned into a conspiratorial grin. "Okay," she said, "let's do it." That Saturday, I rented a gas-powered rototiller. As I rolled it out onto my perfect green grass, I could feel the twitch of a dozen curtains from my neighbor's windows. I pulled the cord, the engine roared to life, and I proceeded to tear up every single blade of grass in my front yard. I turned that symbol of suburban conformity into a plot of rich, brown, chaotic dirt. It was the most satisfying manual labor I'd ever done. My kids, initially confused, were ecstatic when I told them the new plan. We weren't building a fort, we were planting a jungle. We went to the farming supply store and bought the biggest bags of corn seed they had. We spent the rest of the weekend as a family, tilling the soil, running rows, and planting hundreds of corn kernels right there in our front yard, 10 feet from the street. The HOA was on us before the first sprouts even broke the surface. I got a notice about destruction of approved landscaping. I replied with a calm, polite email, quoting the specific bylaw. Per Section 9, Article 2, I am utilizing my property for the cultivation of grains for family consumption. The crop is maize, commonly known as corn. They didn't know how to respond. A few weeks later, when the corn was about a foot high, they tried again, this time with a violation for failure to maintain lawn. I replied again, per the bylaw, I am cultivating plants. This area is no longer a lawn, it is a garden, or more accurately, a field. By July, my front yard was a full-blown cornfield. The stalks towered over my head, creating a dense green jungle. It completely obliterated the view of our house from the street. It was, by any objective measure, 1,000 times more shocking and out of place than a playset. It was glorious. The HOA board was losing their minds. Mrs. Gable actually came to my door, her face betrayed. "This is an outrage," she hissed. "You have made a mockery of this community." "On the contrary, Mrs. Gable," I said with a pleasant smile. "I am simply a homeowner exercising my rights as laid out in the covenant you are sworn to uphold. It's just corn. Would you like some? It should be ready to harvest in a few weeks." She stormed off, sputtering. There was nothing they could do. I had followed the rules perfectly. The best part, my kids loved it. They forgot all about the playset. Their new fort was a real-life cornfield. They played hide-and-seek for hours among the stalks, their imaginations running wild. We did, in fact, have an amazing harvest. We hosted a huge barbecue for all our friends and the cooler neighbors on the block, and we roasted fresh corn from the front yard. We had so much we were giving it away to everyone. At the next annual HOA meeting, there was an emergency vote to amend the bylaws, adding a line that all cultivation must be done in the backyard and be limited to a 10x 10-foot plot. It passed, of course, but I didn't care. I had already won. For one beautiful, golden summer, I had turned my lawn into a farm, fed my family, and given my kids a playground better than anything we could have bought from a catalog. And I'd shown a power-tripping HOA that if they mess with a dad's kids, they might just reap what they sow. You just have to love this one. It's a story that's not just about revenge, but about priorities. The HOA prioritized a rigid, sterile, and frankly boring version of suburban perfection. The father prioritized his kids' happiness. When the HOA blocked the normal path to that happiness, he didn't just find a loophole. He created a whole new experience for his family. What makes this so brilliant is that his act of defiance was actually wholesome and productive. He didn't just do something to annoy the board. He created a family project, grew his own food, and gave his kids a magical summer they'll never forget. The cornfield became the perfect metaphor. It was messy, it was alive, it was unconventional, and it was way more fun than a perfectly manicured lawn. It's a beautiful reminder that sometimes the best way to fight a system that's forgotten what's truly important is to go back to the basics and plant a garden, or in this case, a whole field of defiance. We've seen stories of malicious compliance against faceless boards and petty revenge against annoying neighbors. But our final story tonight is a different beast entirely. This isn't just petty revenge. This is what the internet calls pro-revenge. It's about a deep, personal loss inflicted by a cruel and selfish neighbor. It's about a homeowner who, after losing something irreplaceable, didn't just get even. They executed a calculated, devastatingly effective, and legally ironclad checkmate that hit their enemy exactly where it hurt the most. When my wife and I bought our house 15 years ago, we bought it for the tree. I know that sounds strange, but it was the centerpiece of the property. It was a magnificent 50-year-old oak, a true giant. Its branches spread over half the backyard, creating a perfect canopy of shade. Our kids grew up playing under it. We had a tire swing hanging from one of its thick limbs. We had picnics in its shade. It was more than just a tree. It was part of our family, a silent, leafy guardian of our home. For 14 years, life was peaceful. Then the house next door was sold. The new owner was a guy named Harrison. Harrison was new money. He tore down the perfectly nice house that was there and built a cold, modernist glass box. His whole thing was the view. He had floor-to-ceiling windows specifically designed to look out over our property and towards the mountains in the distance. And that's where the trouble started. A few of the lower branches of my beautiful oak tree, my pride and joy, ever so slightly, impeded his pristine, multi-million-dollar mountain view from his breakfast nook. His first move was to come over, all smiles and fake charm. "Hey there, neighbor," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was a little too firm. "Love what you've done with the place. Say, that's a real big tree you've got there. I was thinking it could probably use a little trim. I'd be happy to cover the cost, of course." "Thanks for the offer, Harrison," I said politely, "but we really love the tree just the way it is. It's perfectly healthy." His smile tightened. "Right, but it's just, the view." "The tree was here long before your view was," I said, my own smile fading. "We're not going to cut it." That was the end of the pleasantries. Harrison's campaign against the tree began. First, it was complaints to the HOA. He claimed the leaves were falling into his brand-new, sterile-looking pool. Then he claimed the shade was causing moss to grow on his roof. His most audacious claim was that the roots were threatening the foundation of his house, a claim my arborist quickly debunked, proving the roots were nowhere near his property. When the HOA told him there was nothing they could do, he hired a lawyer. We started getting letters printed on expensive-looking letterhead, citing obscure city ordinances about view easements and nuisance vegetation. It was all nonsense, but we had to hire our own lawyer to respond. It was stressful and expensive, a constant battle against a man with an endless supply of money and a single-minded obsession. The fight dragged on for almost a year. We won most of the skirmishes. The city sided with us, the arborist's report protected us, but Harrison was relentless. He finally found his weapon, a forgotten, rarely enforced city code from the 1960s that stated no tree or structure could unreasonably obstruct the view from a neighboring property if that view was a significant feature. It was vague, subjective, and clearly designed for major commercial disputes, not a few branches. But Harrison's lawyer was good, and he argued that the sole reason for his client's massive investment was the significant mountain view. It went before the city council. We fought, but we were outmatched and outspent. The council, likely intimidated by Harrison's legal team, sided with him. They issued an order. The tree had to come down. I can't fully describe the feeling of loss. It was devastating. The day the tree removal crew came, I felt sick to my stomach. My wife was crying. I stood at my window and watched as these men with chainsaws dismembered 50 years of life, limb by limb. It took them the entire day. And the whole time, Harrison stood on his deck with a cocktail in his hand, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face. When the last piece of the trunk was hauled away, leaving nothing but a sad, barren patch of dirt, he actually raised his glass to me in a mock toast. In that moment, my grief curdled into a cold, hard resolve. He had taken something precious from my family for his own selfish vanity. He wanted a clear view, and I was going to make sure he regretted it for the rest of his life. For the next month, I did nothing but research. I became an expert in property law, zoning codes, HOA bylaws, and city ordinances. I wasn't looking for a way to get him in trouble. I was looking for something I could build, something permanent, something he couldn't possibly fight. And then I found it, the federal freedom to display the American Flag Act of 2005. It's a federal law that explicitly prevents any HOA or local government from restricting a homeowner's right to fly the American flag on their property. Digging deeper, I found my city's specific rules on flagpoles. They were allowed on any residential property. There was no rule about placement, as long as it wasn't in a public utility easement, and the maximum permitted height was a glorious 35 feet. My plan came into focus, sharp and clear. I took out a measuring tape and found the exact spot on the property line. The spot that, if you drew a straight line from Harrison's breakfast nook to the tallest peak in the mountain range, was dead center. I made a few calls. I ordered a 35-foot, commercial-grade aluminum flagpole. I also ordered the largest flag that was appropriate for a pole that size, a massive 6 by 10-foot Old Glory. Then I hired a professional installation crew. The day they arrived, Harrison was, of course, watching. He saw them unload the giant silver pole from their truck, and his face went from curious to concerned. They used an auger to dig a hole 6 feet deep, right on the spot I had marked. They mixed what seemed like a metric ton of concrete and sank the base deep into the earth. When they finally tilted the massive pole into its vertical position, I saw the dawning horror on Harrison's face. He finally understood what was happening. He came running out onto his deck. "What do you think you're doing?" he screamed. "You can't put that there, it's blocking my view." I just looked at him from my yard and gave him a slow, cold smile. "What's the matter, Harrison?" I called back. "You don't like the American flag." That shut him up. What was he going to do? Complain to the HOA that my display of patriotism was an eyesore? Go to the city and argue that the stars and stripes was unreasonably obstructing his view? The crew finished the installation. I thanked them and waited until they were gone. Then, with my wife and kids beside me, I attached the giant flag to the halyard. I slowly, deliberately, raised it up the entire 35-foot length of the pole. It reached the top and caught the wind, unfurling in all its red, white, and blue glory. It was magnificent, and it was positioned so perfectly that it completely, totally, and utterly obliterated his precious mountain view. He never spoke to us again. He tried to complain to the HOA, but they sent him a letter referencing the federal law and told him there was nothing they could do. He was trapped. He had murdered a 50-year-old tree for the sake of his perfect view, and in its place now stood a 35-foot-tall, legally untouchable monument to my revenge that he would have to look at every single day. I didn't get my tree back, but I got justice. And every time I see that flag waving in the wind, I'm reminded that sometimes the best way to fill an empty space is with a symbol of liberty and a whole lot of spite. Now that is what you call a masterstroke. This revenge is on another level entirely because it is so deeply personal and so poetically just. The neighbor's entire motivation was shallow and aesthetic. He valued his perfect, static view more than a beautiful, living, 50-year-old tree. The homeowner's revenge was perfectly symmetrical. He replaced the organic beauty his neighbor destroyed with an artificial symbol that accomplished the exact same obstruction, but in a way that was legally and socially bulletproof. The use of the American flag is the genius part. It turns the tables on the villain completely. How can you complain about the flag? You immediately become the bad guy in the story. It's a brilliant strategy that weaponizes patriotism as a shield for a deeply satisfying act of personal vengeance. He lost the tree, but he won the war in the most decisive and permanent way possible. And that's our tour through the world of neighborhood warfare, from bubblegum pink houses to patriotic revenge. It just goes to show that when you're pushed to the brink by ridiculous rules or awful neighbors, the pen, or in these cases, the paintbrush, the tiller, and the flagpole, is truly mightier than the sword. These stories are more than just petty revenge. They're masterpieces of malicious compliance. They teach us that the best way to fight a broken system is often from the inside, using its own absurd rules against it. Now I have to ask, what's the craziest rule or the most ridiculous fight you've ever had with an HOA or a neighbor? Tell us your stories in the comments below. We'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed these tales of triumphant spite, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.